Okay, let's just dive right into this because we have a lot to unpack today. We have been waiting an incredibly long time to see what comes next for the Spider-Man cinematic universe, haven't we? The anticipation has just been building and building for years with literally endless speculation about where Peter Parker goes after what was easily the most devastating reset button in modern blockbuster history. But recently, the brand new poster and trailer for Spider-Man Brand New Day just dropped. And honestly, it turns out we might have been looking in entirely the wrong direction this whole time. A single, super easily overlooked detail, hidden right there, deep within one promotional image, might have just completely changed everything we thought we knew about this upcoming movie. I'm absolutely fascinated by how visual marketing can hide massive, narrative-shattering secrets right in plain sight. So today, we're going to look very, very closely at exactly what Marvel is showing us. We're just looking at a cool piece of promotional artwork here. We're looking at a meticulously crafted, highly deliberate statement. And what this statement implies is so incredibly shocking, it threatens to rewrite the entire emotional foundation of this cinematic universe. Let me explain exactly what I am seeing in this artwork, because I promise you, once you see it, you absolutely cannot unsee it. I know exactly how that sounds. Is MJ the real villain? It sounds crazy, right? It sounds completely counterintuitive to literally everything we've experienced with these characters over the last several years. I mean, MJ has always been the grounded emotional anchor. She is Peter's moral compass, she's his tethered humanity, and she was the one person who saw him for exactly who he was beneath the mask. So to suggest that she could become the antagonist, it creates this jarring, almost sickening sense of psychological dissonance. But hear me out, because we are going to methodically investigate this together. As someone who completely geeks out over cinematic storytelling, I absolutely love when creators plant these little seeds that challenge our baseline assumptions and force us to completely reevaluate our comfort zones. So we're going to break down the visual evidence step by step to understand exactly why this jaw-dropping theory isn't just some wild guess. It is the highly compelling, deliberately engineered possibility meant to completely mess with our heads. Section 3. Clues from No Way Home. Now, to truly understand where we're going with this, we have to look at where we've been. The foundation for this new chapter isn't built on a clean slate at all. It's built on the absolute heartbreak of what came before. The context of the past is literally the only way we can decode the clues of the present. I want you to look really closely at this specific quote. Zendaya recently hinted in an interview about the upcoming film, stating that we are going to see something similar to the ending of No Way Home. Let's just take a second to pause and really deeply analyze the gravity of what that phrasing implies. You'll notice she didn't say the movie would feature bigger action or wilder multiverse cameos or some massive grand spectacle. She specifically invoked the ending of No Way Home. In a cinematic universe normally defined by escalating physical threats, warning us of an escalating emotional threat is a massive, massive tell. Repeating that exact level of emotional trauma implies profound, permanent implications for these characters. It essentially tells us that the core conflict of Brand New Day isn't just about punching a bad guy. It is deeply and perhaps irreparably personal.
So the absolutely crucial point here is grasping the emotional weight of No Way Home's ending. It wasn't just a sad goodbye, you know? It was the visceral trauma of forgotten love. Let's think back to that final sequence. Peter Parker sacrificed his identity, literally erasing his very existence from the memories of the people he loved most, specifically MJ, all just to save the universe. It was an ending defined by staggering loss, total isolation, and this overwhelming emotional deficit. We left Peter in that tiny, dilapidated apartment, completely anonymous and utterly alone. That ending was essentially a funeral for Peter Parker's happiness. If we are being explicitly warned by the cast that we're heading toward a similar level of emotional devastation in this new story, that is a massive, heartbreaking red flag. It means the upcoming threat is going to bypass his physical strength entirely. It's a direct, targeted threat to the very fabric of Peter's emotional connections.
Let's take a slow academic pause here for a second to look at the visual language of cinema, because this is where the whole theory really takes shape. In masterful visual storytelling, there's this tradition we can call the eye motif. It's a technique where a hero's greatest threat, their ultimate adversary, is explicitly reflected in the lens of their eye on promotional materials. Why do filmmakers do this? Well, because the eye is the window to the soul, right? Merging the hero's subjective gaze with the objective image of the villain suggests that the hero is utterly consumed by them. This is not an accident. It is a subconscious psychological trigger designed to prepare the audience for the incoming threat. It tells the viewer, visually, hey, this is what is dominating the hero's vision. This is the singular, inescapable force they are up against. Moving on to the reflection precedent. This brings us to exactly why we absolutely have to examine the history of this specific franchise. Marketing departments at this level of billion-dollar studio filmmaking do not make arbitrary choices, okay? Every single pixel is scrutinized and visual patterns are established for a very specific reason. So I am going to slowly lay out the roadmap of our visual evidence here. We're going to look at 3 distinct steps. Step 1 is the Doc Ock precedent. Step 2 is the electro repetition, and step 3 will be the brand new day anomaly. I promise you, following this specific historical breadcrumb trail is going to perfectly illuminate why the new poster is hiding such a shocking revelation. So let's look at the very first piece of evidence. Let's look back at the posters from previous eras of these movies. In the iconic Spider-Man 2 poster, right there, completely unmistakable in the reflection of Spider-Man's eye, was Dr. Octopus. It was a bold, incredibly striking visual choice for 2004. The sepia-toned lighting highlighted the menacing silhouette of those mechanical tentacles, placed literally inside the hero's vision, right over the sleek white lens of the mask. And what happened? Well, Doc Ock ended up being the legendary main villain of the movie. The reflection wasn't just some cool artistic flourish from a graphic designer. It was a direct, undeniable confirmation of the primary antagonist. It established a very specific visual rule for how the studio markets this character's greatest threats. Let's look at the Electro connection. Now, it would be incredibly easy to just dismiss that Dr. Octopus poster as a one-off, right? Just a cool design choice from a bygone era of superhero marketing. But we need to see how this visual foreshadowing wasn't a mistake. It is a deliberate, intentional pattern woven into the very fabric of how these movies are presented to the public. Let's carefully break down the marketing for The Amazing Spider-Man 2, which was released a full 10 years later. Once again, we look at the primary poster, and we look at the lens of the mask, and right there, bathed in this harsh neon blue light against the textured eye, Electro was reflected directly in Spider-Man's gaze. It perfectly mirrored the previous motif. The marketing team deliberately chose to repeat the exact same visual cue from a decade prior, establishing a cross-generational marketing role. And just like before, Electro was cemented as the primary antagonist, the main villain of the film. So let's just slowly and methodically recap this undeniable historical timeline. Back in 2004, Dr. Octopus is reflected in the eye, and he is the main villain. Fast forward 10 years later, in 2014, Electro is reflected in the eye, and he is the main villain. And now we arrive at the present day, waiting to see who represents the next great threat. This timeline drives home a singular, inescapable point. The studio uses this specific dramatic visual cue exclusively to reveal main antagonists. The reflection in the eye equals the ultimate threat. It is a cinematic language they have meticulously trained us to understand over literally decades.
Which brings us to MJ in the eye.
And that brings us perfectly back to the present day, with a dramatic flair that honestly gave me literal chills when I first noticed it. I want to focus our undivided attention entirely on the newly released Brand New Day poster. We know the history now. We know the established cross-generational visual rules of this universe. So when we look at the lens of the mask this time, we have to be prepared for what we find. Here is the crucial, lingering question that we must ask ourselves right now. Why is MJ reflected in Spider-Man's eye on this new poster? It is an image of intense cognitive dissonance. We are forced right now to reconcile the established historical precedent, where villains and absolutely only villains occupy that reflective space, with the shocking, heartbreaking image of MJ standing in that exact same reflection. If the eye always reflects the threat, why in the world are we looking at the love of his life? It is a highly deliberate subversion of a rule, and it's designed to completely mess with us.
The villain revelation.
Let's pull all of this together into the grand climax of this explainer. We have all the pieces on the board right in front of us. We need to synthesize the undeniable visual evidence from the posters and the deeply emotional interview clues into one unavoidable, terrifying conclusion. We simply cannot ignore the historical precedent, and we cannot ignore the warnings of emotional devastation. When you align Zendaya's chilling warning about repeating the trauma of the previous film with a deeply entrenched visual motif that exclusively reserves the eye reflection for main antagonists, it leaves us with only one brilliant, devastating cinematic reality. Marvel is heavily teasing MJ as the villain. But how? Well, think about the psychology of it. Could they be setting her up as a villain born not of typical comic book malice, but of a fractured reality? Her mind might be desperately trying to reconcile the erased memories of the previous film's conclusion, literally tearing her psyche apart and putting her directly at odds with Spider-Man. Imagine the absolute heartbreak of Peter Parker having to pull his punches against the woman he sacrificed everything to protect. Imagine him trying to fight a threat where winning literally means destroying the person he loves most in the world. That is the absolute peak of emotional trauma. The visual evidence undeniably points to her being the core threat, the emotional wrecking ball of this brand new story. So, I want to leave you with this final haunting thought. Are you ready for the ultimate betrayal? Because the next time you look at that poster, I urge you to see it in a completely new light. It is not just some sweet romantic reunion hiding in a reflection. It is a meticulously placed, deeply unsettling warning based on decades of visual precedent. The greatest threat Peter Parker has ever faced might not be a superpowered monster from the multiverse, but the person who no longer remembers who he is, weaponized against him. Let that sink in for a minute. Thank you so much for exploring this deep dive visual explainer with me.